Hello everybody, I am Tom and you are watching me play Baldur's Gate 3. In today's video we're going to go over the abilities, skills, and combat in Baldur's Gate 3. Before we begin, if you enjoy this video, please leave it a like, and subscribe to my channel if you aren't already. But with that, let's start out with the character creator. Okay, so to properly understand how the combat in this game works, you first need to understand which ability scores are important for what it is you're trying to do. Starting out with strength, this determines how much you can carry. There we go. This determines how much you can carry as well as how far you can jump, but most importantly, it determines how often you hit and how much damage you do with strength-based weapons. Strength-based weapons here isn't entirely specific as a descriptor, but what this means is, aside from a few exceptions which I'll touch on later, it's melee weapons. All melee weapons are strength weapons, with a few exceptions. If you're attacking with a sword or an axe, you'll be using your strength modifier to govern whether or not you hit the enemy and how much damage you do when you hit them. Next up, we have dexterity. First off, like strength, it determines the ability to hit and damage done with dexterity-based weapons, specifically ranged weaponry, and a select collection of melee weapons that require quote-unquote finesse to wield. Think daggers, rapiers, short swords, that kind of thing. Additionally, dexterity adds to your armor class so long as you're not wearing heavy armor. So your AC, or your armor class, is the value that prevents you from being hit. The higher your AC is, the harder it is to hit you in combat. Constitution is far simpler. All it determines is your health. The higher your constitution, the more HP you have. Moving on now to the mental stats. There's quite a few things these do, but as far as combat goes, what these determine is that your spell effectiveness, depending on the class you are. So for intelligence, it is your spell casting modifier for wizards. For wisdom, it is your spell casting modifier for druids, rangers, and clerics. And charisma is your spellcasting modifier for bards, paladins, sorcerers, and warlocks. Other than that, they have some things to do with skills and other in-game things, which I'll go over like pretty much right now. But as far as actual combat goes, all they really effectively change is your spellcasting ability, so how good you are at casting spells. How often they'll hit is the main thing it changes. Now, it's also worth noting here that the total score is generally less relevant than the modifier you get. You see here with the strength, we have 16 strength. This gives us a +3 modifier. The value is determined by taking your ability score, subtracting 10, and then dividing by 2. Or, to put it in a less formulaic way, every 2 points above 10 you get a +1, and every 2 points below 10 you get a -1. This means that generally you want to aim to have even stats. You can see here I have fully even stats on everything. The reason that is that if we were to put up, let's say strength here goes from 16 to 17, it increases our strength, but our modifier remains the same. I would have to hit 18 to get this up to a +4. So you probably want, in most cases, to have an even spread of stats, because that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck as far as the modifiers are concerned. Now that we understand ability scores and their relevant multipliers, we can take a look at skills and how they are implemented. As you've been playing through the game, you'll have no doubt seen skill checks as you explore the world, or in dialogue when you have to persuade someone or cajole an animal to make sure it doesn't attack you. Things like this. These skills are all determined by your ability modifiers. To see which skills are associated with which abilities, simply expand the drop-down on the ability score screen. You can see here we can do it in Character Creator. We can also do it in-game. If you go in-game just to your character sheet, you can expand them just as easily. The bonus you get from these is directly translated from your ability modifier, and depending on your race, background, and class choice, you'll also have a choice of proficiencies. Proficiencies are skills and equipment that, as the name might suggest, you're proficient in. All this does mathematically is it adds a flat bump to the relevant area. This value is dependent on your level. It starts out at 2, you can see down here, proficiency bonus +2. This bonus gets added to the following dice rolls, attacks, spell attacks, skills, and saving throws that you're proficient in. But that will go higher as you level up. For instance, you can see here on this character that we have proficiency in insight. So our wisdom is +2, and our insight is and our proficiency is +2, so we get +2 from the wisdom and then +2 from the proficiency. So rather than a +2 that we have in our other wisdom skills, we have a +4 in both insight and medicine because we're proficient with both. This little dot here denotes what you are proficient with. But with that, I think we're completely done with the character creator section of the video, so we can move on to in-game. Okay, so now we can move on to the equipment in Baldur's Gate 3. Starting out with armor. There are technically 4 different types of armor, quote-unquote, in the game. There is light, medium, heavy, and just clothing, which is effectively no armor. Wearing literally nothing or wearing these robes gives you exactly the same AC. It doesn't matter. You can run if you are wearing robes. Strictly speaking, you can run around naked, and there's no detriment. Armor is used to determine your armor class, or AC. I'll probably just call it AC going forward. This is the number that determines your chance to avoid being hit by an enemy. When you're not wearing armor, your default armor class, which is the same as clothes you can see here, is 10 plus your dexterity modifier. Light armor and medium armor also add your dexterity modifier, as you can see here, but it just scales up how good the armor is. Light armor is usually 11 or 12, plus dexterity, and heavy armor is usually 14 or 15. 13 can kind of go either way, it can be medium armor or light armor. But it's the base that gets increased, and then you add your dexterity on top of that. Finally, we have heavy armor, where you don't get any of your dexterity added whatsoever, but it's usually quite a high number, anywhere between 14 all the way up to 18, as far as actual numbers that you can have on your armor. You can have 18 on your armor relatively easily with heavy armor. It's some of the better heavy armor, you're talking like full plate, which is expensive, usually in D&D. I'm assuming it's going to be the same here. The early access, as far as I can tell, the only heavy armor you can get is ringmail, which is pretty crap heavy armor, really. In general, you're going to be better off using something like this, scale mail. Because they're effectively the same, except you can add your dexterity on the scale mail, and you can't on the ringmail. A final note I want to add here is about shields. Shields just give you a plus 2 to AC, straight off the bat, assuming you have proficiency in them. And a note that I will make... actually, I'll make that note in a second. The other thing you can get is gloves, boots. We can look in here, actually. If we look here, so you have gloves, belts, boots, helmets, capes, rings, and necklaces. All of these don't add any armor. There's no benefit to wearing them. If they don't give you something specific, there's no reason to wear them. Like these simple boots, for instance. Made of tough, well-worn leather, these boots have survived many years and can survive many more. If I take these off and don't wear them, there's literally no difference for me whatsoever whether or not I'm wearing these boots. It doesn't make a difference. The only reason they're good is if you have... for instance, actually I can just do this from my inventory, can't I? Yeah, like these gloves of power. These are a benefit to me. I think I got a brand. These are actually slightly cursed, but ignoring that. The only reason these are useful is if they give you some kind of effect. You see here we get Absolute's Bane when we wear these gloves. So, these slots are only particularly useful. I'm wearing a necklace here, this does literally nothing for me. I'm doing it just because I had a necklace. These slots are only useful if there's a magic ability that you can affect with it. Next up, I can talk about some weapons. We have two main categories of weapons. There's ranged and melee. Ranged weapons use dexterity in their attack. You can see here this goblin bow. 1d6 piercing damage. And you can see on my ranged attack is plus 0. So it's 1d6 plus 0. As far as the damage that I do. As well as melee weapons. And they generally use strength. You can see here this hand axe. It's 1d6 slashing damage. My melee attack is plus 2. So it's 1d6 plus 2. Now, I said melee weapons generally use strength. That's because sometimes they can use dexterity. Specifically, I said finesse weapons. So if you look at this scimitar here, I can look at a dagger too. Dagger works just as well. A dagger is a finesse weapon. You see under these little listings, they have range, and then it's light weapon, which means you can hold two at once. I can hold a scimitar and a hand axe because they're both light weapons. But these are also finesse weapons. What this means is that I can add my dexterity to the damage rather than my strength. You can still use your strength with a finesse weapon. You don't have to make the choice there. You can use strength if your strength is higher, but if you have a high dexterity character, using one of these weapons in melee is going to be better because you're going to be hitting more often and doing more damage. Some other notable tags to go over here is this battle axe here. You see it has two different damage numbers. That's because it's versatile. So you can use it in one hand and it'll do 1d8 slashing, or you can use it two-handed and you can do 1d10 slashing. The only benefit to using it one-handed really is you can also wield a shield while doing it. And also two-handed, that means that you have to wield it in two hands, as quarterstaff is two-handed, so you have to use two hands. Other than that, there are a few more tags, but many of them aren't properly implemented yet, and the ones that are properly implemented, most of them are relatively intuitive, and they can kind of forego an explanation. The last point I'll make about equipment is proficiencies. Like skills, your character will have certain equipment that they can use and some that they cannot, depending on your race and your class. These are clearly outlined in the character creator, but it doesn't really explain what proficiency on equipment does. So starting out with weapons, you can use weapons regardless of whether or not you're proficient with them. You can see here this battle axe, I'm not proficient with battle axes. I can still equip battle axe. All this does is that it means that I'm not getting my proficiency bonus when I attack with it. So I'm going to be hitting far less often when I use this weapon as opposed to one that I'm proficient with, so I can use this hand axe again. I'm proficient with the hand axe, I am proficient with this dagger. I can use both of them without any problem, and I get my proficiency bonus. You see here, melee attacks is +2. If we equip this goblin bow, my range attack is +4, which is much nicer. In fact, I would probably be better off doing this, I think, strictly speaking. Because I think my dexterity is higher than my strength, so having a finesse weapon is probably better. But you can use something that you're not proficient with, you're just going to be hitting far less often. It's still perfectly possible to use it. As for armor, this is a much worse downside. Once again, you can wear armor you're not proficient in. For instance, I can put this heavy armor on. But while this heavy armor's on, I can't cast any spells, and all of my attacks, ability checks, and saving throws are all rolled at disadvantage. So you can see here I can't cast spells. It says down the bottom, not proficient with the equipped armor, so I have to actually change my armor out to be able to cast spells. Now I can cast spells again. So you definitely want to make sure you're proficient with the armor that you're wearing. Always make sure you're wearing proficient armor, because if you're not, you're going to have a bad time. But I think that's everything to do with equipment. Any questions, ask them down in the comments, but I think I covered it relatively well. Now we can move on to the combat. Okay, so next we can move on to the combat in Baldur's Gate 3. Firstly, let's go over the basics of the things you can do on a turn. First of all, you can move. You can see here we have the movement bar. I'm hovering over it now. 30 feet out of 30 feet. While in combat, all the movement you do will count towards this going down. This is going to depend on race, mainly, how far you can move. The average is 30 feet, or 9 meters in metric, per round. The amount that this is will be different depending on your race. For instance, if you're one of the shorter races, chances are you're probably going to be 25 feet. And I think Wood Elf gets an additional 5 feet of movement, so you can move 35 feet rather than 30 feet. But for the most part, the average is going to be 30 feet per round. You also have an action. This consists of doing a weapon attack, you can see here. Either a range attack, or either a melee attack or a range attack. I'm not currently wielding a bow, but melee attack or range attack, that's an action. You can also throw an item or a creature. You can see here, it'll give you a list of items you can throw. Whoops, right click. You can dash. This will double your movement speed for the round, so it'll push it up to 60 feet. You can knock unconscious. This is a non-lethal melee attack, so if you're standing next to a creature and you want to knock them out, but you don't want to kill them, you can do this. And finally is the help action. This will remove prone, downed, sleep, emwebbed, and ensnared. Downed is by far the worst here. That's the one just before dead. So if your character is knocked down and they're doing death saving throws, you can use this to immediately get them back up to 1 hit point. So that's by far the most useful one to be able to stop. But you also have, the other thing you can do with actions is cast spells. You can see here, Eldritch Blast, that's an action to cast. Chill Touch, action to cast. Most attacking spells are likely going to be an action to cast them. There are some utility ones that are bonus actions, which I'm going to go over right now. So bonus actions, you also have a bonus action. You can cast certain spells with them, as I just said. For instance, here we go, Dancing Lights, that's a bonus action to cast. Hex, bonus action to cast. A lot of things that are kind of supplementary to an attack are often going to be bonus actions rather than actions. You can also jump as a bonus action. So you can jump and move a distance depending on your strength. You can do a jump. All of these you can do during combat, by the way. Outside of combat, you can do them as many times as you wish, but in combat, you are limited to your bonus action per turn. Next, we have Dip. There's nothing around me, but Gale, help me out, will you? If there was some fire on the ground, for instance, you can dip your weapon in the fire, and now your weapons do fire damage for the next attack. You can also shove. Sorry, Gale. He's just being the one I'm using at the moment, apparently. But you can just push people. That is an incredibly useful bonus action, particularly if you're fighting people on a rooftop, because you can just push them off the rooftop. And finally, you can sneak, or attempt to hide. As long as you're not in the vision cone of an enemy, this will work 100% of the time. If you are in the vision cone of an enemy, you can technically still hide. It's going to be very difficult most of the time, but if you're obscured by, like, I don't know, a wagon or something, or, like, you're still technically in their line of sight, but there's something in the way, there is a good chance that you can actually roll a stealth check and hide, even if you're inside their sight cone. But that's all the things you can do as a bonus action. Additionally, you also have reactions. These are effects that can happen when it isn't your turn, and they're triggered by when an enemy does something to you or around you. For the vast majority of characters, at least in the early access, the only reaction you're likely going to have is the attack of opportunity, which is this one here. You can see here I also have repelling blast. That's the thing because I'm a warlock. For the most part, you can ignore that. Opportunity attack is the main one that you're going to have as pretty much all characters. But what this does is that when someone leaves your area of effect, if someone's standing next to you and they try and run away, you will attack them. That's all that is. If you don't want to do that, you can actually toggle these on and off. These are toggleable. It's not working particularly well at the moment, but they are toggleable. You can turn them on and off. I don't know why it's not working actually. Usually works out of combat straight away. But if you don't want to do an attack of opportunity, you can turn it off. It may be a thing where you have to do it in combat. That could be a thing. But you can toggle it off so you won't actually use your reaction for a specific thing if you don't want to. As I said, in the early access, attack of opportunity is pretty much the only reaction you're going to want to be using anyway. So probably don't want to toggle it off, but in the future there may be a reason to do so. And finally we have free actions. These are actions that take no resources whatsoever, and they can be done an infinite amount of times during battle. Currently, changing weapons, for instance, is counted as a free action. If I go to my inventory and I go equip a bow, that is a free action. I can equip a bow, I can change my weapons, I can do whatever I want. That's all free actions. Alright, so let's actually move into combat and see what we see, shall we? Okay, moving on now to specifics. Starting with a weapon attack. Attacking here with a melee weapon, the chance to hit is determined by my strength score, actually my dexterity score in this case, because I'm attacking with finesse weapons. Let's change to a hand axe. It's determined by my strength score, because I'm doing a melee attack. And since I'm proficient with this axe, I'm getting my proficiency bonus added as well. We'll see, we can see this in the combat log if I attack. Fantastic. If we actually open the combat log. Let's make the combat log slightly bigger so I can actually see. So I use main hand attack 1d6 slashing on the goblin. And then we can see we hit. I rolled a 19, so that's pretty good. I did 1d20, I had advantage, I'll go over that in a second. And then we get +2 from my proficiency, which gives me a 21. His armor class is 9, so we needed to beat the 9. We did quite handily. And then we rolled the damage, which was 1d6, and we got a 6. So that's how that works. You can see there, our strength is 0, so we actually got a +0 from our strength. But our strength is added to that as well. If I were to use, instead, a ranged attack, I'm just going to let these guys attack so we can go back to my guys. Here we go. If I were to instead do a ranged attack, fantastic. So Asterion did a ranged attack here. You can see here he got an 8 on his attack roll. He got 2 from proficiency, and then he got a +3 from his dexterity modifier because his dexterity is +3. And then the damage roll, he got a 1d6, he rolled a 1, and his dexterity modifier is also added to that, so he got 4 total. That's how much damage he did total, which is actually the minimum amount of damage he can do, annoyingly, but nonetheless. Okay, so next we can move on to spells. These are separated into 3 different kinds of spells. First off, we have the attack roll spells. These work identically to weapon attacks, except rather than strength or dexterity as their additional modifier you add the relevant mental stat, which is determined by your class. For instance, here I'm a wizard. If I use this firebolt, this is a ranged spell attack. So it's just the same as shooting a bow effectively, but if we do the attack, He just joined the battle, strictly speaking, because he wasn't in here before. You can see here, it was an attack roll, we rolled a 5, we're proficient, and then we add our intelligence modifier. Gives us 10, beats his armor class of 9, so we do damage. And then you just roll the damage. The next type of spell we have is Shadowheart. She's probably the best at showing this. Next is the saving throw type of spell. This means that you aren't rolling to see if you hit, the enemy is rolling to see if they can save from the effect. Spells of this kind generally have both a damaging and a secondary effect. If the creature succeeds in the save, it usually still takes half damage, even if you quote-unquote miss. The number you have to hit to save is determined by your spellcasting modifier. Specifically for those wondering, this is 8 plus your spellcasting modifier plus your proficiency bonus. So for more early adventurers, this will usually be 12 to 14. We can see here, if I go here with Shadowheart, you can see our spell save DC is 13. It explains it here as well if you actually hover over it. Certain spells require enemies to make a saving throw. Your spellcasting ability modifier is added to this value, with the total defining the saving throw's DC difficulty class. So, if we do something like Sacred Flame, this is, you can see down the bottom it says attack/save dexterity, which means they make a dexterity saving throw. So here is a 55% chance, take it. She's going to have to walk down this ladder to do it, apparently, but that's fine. And now she's in the battle. Alright, so the last type of spell is amount of hit points spells. Not the official name, obviously. But these spells work by affecting a number of enemies in a group, but the spell will only work on a number of cumulative hit points. For instance, the sleep spell here, put creatures to a combined 24 hit points into a magical slumber. So if we select the spell, you can see it's an area of effect. And we can see here, if we hover over this guy here, for instance, you can't get them on multiple levels. I think that's something they should change, because I'm pretty sure it should be like a sphere of influence. So technically it should hit both of these guys, but it currently doesn't. But you can see here, this guy has 6 hit points, this guy has 6 hit points. It says target HP affected, 6 out of 24. So 100%, this guy's falling asleep. Just like that. There are only a couple of spells in the game currently that use this effect. When we go to higher levels, there'll be a couple more, but it is by far the rarest type of spell that you can possibly have. Most of them are either attack spells or saving throws. The vast majority are likely going to be saving throw spells. Okay, so one last thing I want to go over is advantage and disadvantage. This is the thing I see a lot of people having trouble with in the game, specifically not understanding why some attacks have a lower chance to hit than others, and then in other scenarios they have a much higher chance to hit. This is down to the advantage system. Advantage in Baldur's Gate 3 simply means that you roll twice and you take the best roll. Conversely, with disadvantage you take the worst roll. There are many things that will determine whether you get advantage on a specific attack, and I'll go over all of them now. First is probably the easiest to understand, it's elevation. If you are higher than another creature, you will have advantage on range attacks, and if you're below the creature, you will have disadvantage on range attacks. So here you can see here the Eldritch Blast is a spell attack, but it's a ranged spell attack. So if I fire at this guy, I'm lower than him. You see on the bottom left, it says low ground, which with a little down arrow, that means we have disadvantage because we're shooting from low ground. Next up, we have backstabbing. Let's see if I can actually get somewhere to backstab. I don't think I likely can. Yeah, not easily, because this guy's not even facing the correct direction. If you attack from behind an enemy, you'll also get advantage. Specifically for a melee attack. If you melee attack a creature and you're standing behind it, you'll get a higher chance to hit because you'll have advantage. So always try and attack from the rear if you can. Also sneaking, if you attack from stealth, you will get advantage on the attack, regardless of whether it's ranged or melee. So Shadowheart, for instance, we can go to Shadowheart here. I can go, well, I mean, this is a bad example because I'm stuck behind a fence. But if we sneak, so I'm now sneaking, you can see here the little glow around me, lightly obscured. If I do a ranged attack here, we get advantage on the attack. Now you can see I also get a lot of disadvantages here, but I also get advantage from the from the fact that I'm sneaking. You can see the little up arrow, it just says advantage on attack. That is because I'm sneaking. That's why I get that bonus. This also goes into a nice effect that I can explain here is prone creatures. We have disadvantage on this attack because this creature is prone. If we were doing a melee attack on this creature, it would be at advantage, but because it's a ranged attack, it's at disadvantage. That one's a bit harder for a lot of people to understand, but the idea of it, essentially, is that if it's lying on the ground in front of you, it's very easy to hit with a melee attack because you're standing directly over it. But a ranged attack, it has a lower profile because it's lying on the ground, therefore it's harder to hit. It makes sense intuitively, but it's not entirely clear for a lot of people. It's like, he's prone, therefore I should have advantage. But if you're doing a ranged attack, he's actually harder to hit because he's prone. Okay, so now we also have threat range. This one is rather simple mechanically, but it's hard for people to conceptualize, I think. But to put it bluntly, if you are in an enemy's quote-unquote threat range, you have disadvantage on all your ranged attacks. If we go for a ranged attack here, we're standing right next to this goblin. Target is too close, and I'm threatened. So you see here, we have... we're slightly too close, but also, if I tried to shoot... I mean, for argument's sake, I'm not likely to do this. But if we were trying to shoot Shadowheart here, we still have disadvantage because we're still threatened. If you're in the threatened range of an enemy, you're always going to have disadvantage on anybody you're attacking. Additionally, if you're trying to attack the creature right next to in range, you also get disadvantage irrespective. But if we were to jump out of this threat range, it's worth noting here that, if I move a bit closer, you can see we're threatened here. We're not in melee range, but we're still in threatened range. The threatened range is actually slightly longer than the, melee range. So you can be out of melee, but still threatened. You can see here we're out of melee range. We're out of threatened range, rather, so we now have no disadvantage on the attack, so we've got a 90% chance to hit. Something else I need to go over for advantage and disadvantage. We're not actually in combat now. It's easier to explain out of combat than it is in combat, unfortunately. But that is light and dark. If an enemy is obscured by shadow, then an attack on them is taken at disadvantage. There are a lot of races in Faerûn that have dark vision. If we go to my drow here, you can notice here the difference between Gale, for instance. We go to Gale, everything is quite dark in here, except for where the light sources are coming in. And if we go shift, we can see here, he's heavily obscured. Because we're in the dark. Unfortunately, standing in that light doesn't work. That light ray doesn't actually work how it's supposed to. But if we hide here, we can see here we're heavily obscured. You are hiding in a heavily obscured area. Expect to go undetected unless you get too close to another creature. It's very easy to actually waddle your way past people if you're in complete darkness. So that actually goes into the stealth mechanics as well. But even if you're not stealthing, if you're in complete darkness, you are much harder to hit. Now, as I said, there are a lot of races that have dark vision, allowing them to see in darkness. If we go from here, we see it's quite dark in this room. Relatively hard to see if we switch to a character that has dark vision. Everything lightens up just that wee bit. Everything gets a bit brighter. And that's to indicate because we have dark vision, so we can see in the dark better. But this means that an enemy that has dark vision is less likely to be able to... less likely to get disadvantage because they can see further. So as far as they're concerned, you're standing in light, even if you're standing in darkness. That's only out to a certain radius, however. So try to provide them with some source of light, your characters, some source of light when they're attacking. Particularly if they're attacking in melee range. So for instance, I don't have the light spell equipped. Apparently Gale never learnt light spell. Well, we can do dancing lights, I suppose. For instance, dancing light here, it's a cantrip and it's a bonus action. You can cast this on an enemy. You can also cast it anywhere, but that will create a light source. So if you cast this near an enemy, your characters that don't have dark vision will be able to see them much easier to hit them with ranged attacks. So always try and light up areas when you're going, because otherwise you're likely going to give yourself disadvantage. You can walk around with a torch. The problem with doing so, or just light up your weapons, if you have the light spell, you can actually just light your weapon up, so it's just glowing constantly. The danger of doing this, obviously, is it makes it easier for the enemies to see you, so they don't get disadvantage on their attacks. So, you know, it's a give and take. It is dangerous to do so, but it also makes it very easy for you to hit your attacks. Because if your melee weapon is glowing, it makes it very easy to hit an enemy because you can see, because you're creating a light source. You yourself are a light source. But I think that's just about everything. The last thing I want to go over is the percent to hit. So that percentage chance you get when you hover over an enemy. This seems to confuse some people because like they'll miss a 90% chance or whatever. But all these numbers mean is it's Larian taking the roll required and doing a direct transfer to a percentage chance. So, if you need to roll a 3 or above, it'll say you have a 90% chance to hit. If you get a bullshit roll and you miss the 90%, just take a gander at the combat log, and you'll see specifically what you rolled, probably a 2. It's either a 1 or a 2 if you miss a 90% chance. Whether or not knowing this information makes you feel better or worse is likely down to a person-by-person kind of scenario, but the combat log will tell you specifically how badly you missed. In any case, that's it. If you have any questions, please ask them down in the comment section. I'll do my best to answer all of them. If there's anything I didn't cover properly, just ask in the comments. I'll try to explain it as best as possible. But if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and consider subscribing if you are not so already. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys.